Why yelling never works. Science explained. Your dog countersurfs. You yell. He freezes, ears back, tail tucked, and you feel like the message landed. Here's the problem. What you just watched wasn't understanding. It was fear. And the two look almost identical from across the kitchen. Every year, millions of dog owners raise their voice at a dog that jumped, barked, chewed, or bolted, convinced that a sharper tone will finally make the lesson stick. But decades of research into how dogs actually process sound, stress, and consequence tell a very different story. Yelling doesn't teach a dog what to do instead. In many cases, it doesn't even teach the dog what it did wrong. It just teaches the dog that you, specifically, are a source of sudden, unpredictable danger. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why raising your voice backfires and what your dog's brain is actually doing in that moment instead of learning. Why this matters more than you think. Most owners don't yell because they're cruel. They yell because it feels like it works. The dog stops. The behavior halts, at least for a few seconds. That immediate pause is what keeps the habit alive. It's a small, satisfying win that hides a much bigger loss. The confusion comes from mixing up two completely different things: suppression and learning. Suppression is when a dog stops doing something because it's frightened in that instant. Learning is when a dog understands which behavior actually gets a better outcome. Yelling is extremely good at the first and almost useless at the second, and most owners have never had that distinction pointed out to them. This misunderstanding shapes the whole relationship. Owners start to believe their dog knows better and is choosing to misbehave anyway, when in reality the dog often never learned the alternative at all. It just learned to look guilty around a raised voice. And that gap between what we assume our dog understands and what's actually happening in his brain is where most training frustration comes from. The science. What's actually happening in your dog's body? When you raise your voice, your dog's amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, reacts within a fraction of a second, well before any conscious thinking part of the brain gets involved. This triggers a stress response, a rush of cortisol and adrenaline, the same hormones involved in a fight-or-flight reaction. Here's the part most people don't expect. Elevated stress hormones actively interfere with the brain regions responsible for forming new associations and retrieving learned information. In simple terms, a stressed brain is a worse learning machine. Dogs under acute stress show poorer performance on memory and problem-solving tasks compared to calm dogs, which means the exact moment you're trying hardest to teach something is the moment your dog is least equipped to absorb it. There's also a hearing factor most people never consider. Dogs' hearing range and sensitivity to sudden, sharp sound bursts are significantly greater than ours. A tone that feels like firm correction to you can register as an acoustic startle to your dog, closer to a car backfiring than a stern word. That startle response is processed as a threat cue, not as information about jumping on the counter. But that's only part of the story, because what your dog does with that fear afterward is where things get really interesting. What your dog is really communicating. When a dog freezes, tucks its tail, or rolls onto its back after being yelled at, most owners read this as he knows he did something wrong. Canine behavior researchers read it differently. These are appeasement signals, part of a communication system dogs use to de-escalate perceived conflict and avoid further confrontation. Your dog isn't reflecting on the ethics of eating the sandwich off the counter. He's reading your body, your volume, your posture, the tightness in your face, and responding to you, right now, as a potential threat that needs calming down. The context of counter, sandwich, 5 minutes ago isn't part of that calculation at all, because dogs primarily connect consequences with behavior only when the timing is extremely tight, within about a second or two. This is why yelling at a dog for something he did before you walked into the room almost never produces the outcome owners expect. The dog isn't ignoring the lesson. There was no lesson delivered in a form his brain could use. What he's showing you is an appeasement display in response to your emotional state in this exact moment, which is a completely different message than "I understand what you did wrong." Common myths about yelling and correction. Myth: he knows he's guilty, look at his face. That expression, often called the guilty look, has been studied directly. Researchers have found that dogs display this posture based on the owner's behavior and tone toward them, not on whether the dog actually did something. Dogs showed the same guilty look whether they'd broken a rule or not, as long as the owner acted accusatory. It's a response to us, not a confession. Myth: a firm, loud voice shows leadership. This idea borrows from outdated dominance-based training models that have been largely set aside as our understanding of wolf and dog social structures improved. Volume doesn't communicate authority to a dog's brain, it communicates threat. Clear, calm, and consistent cues carry far more instructive information than intensity does. Myth: if yelling stops the behavior, it worked. It suppressed the behavior in that instant. Whether that counts as working depends entirely on what you're optimizing for. If the goal is a dog who understands what to do next time, suppression without replacement teaching usually just delays the same behavior until you're not in the room to yell. Evidence here isn't uniformly one-sided. Some behaviors genuinely do decrease after aversive corrections, at least short-term, and researchers don't claim yelling has zero effect. What's well documented is the trade-off. Studies comparing dogs trained with aversive methods to dogs trained with reward-based methods have found the aversive method dogs show more stress-related behaviors, and, in several studies, poorer performance on subsequent learning tasks. The behavior may stop. The dog's ability to keep learning from you often gets worse. What you should actually do. The goal isn't to never react, it's to swap punish the past for reward the alternative, which is where the real behavior change happens. Catch it early, not after. If you're going to intervene, do it in the act, not minutes later. Timing this tight is the only way your dog can link the moment to the message at all. Redirect, instead of reprimand. Instead of yelling at a dog for jumping up, teach and reward four-on-the-floor greetings until that becomes the automatic move. You're not erasing a behavior, you're making a better one more rewarding to perform. Watch your tone, not just your words. Dogs respond heavily to pitch and rhythm. A short, calm off delivered evenly interrupts a behavior without triggering the threat response that a shout does, and it leaves your dog's brain in a state where it can actually register what comes next. Reinforce the instant it works. The window for a dog to connect an action with a consequence is short. A treat, a word, or a touch delivered right as the good behavior happens builds the association far faster than any correction delivered after the fact. Notice what you're accidentally rewarding. Attention, even angry attention, is still attention. For some dogs, a dramatic reaction from you is more reinforcing than the couch cushion was interesting in the first place. Calm, boring consequences sometimes outperform loud ones simply because they don't feed the behavior. Surprising facts and real comparisons. Wolves offer a useful comparison here. Within wolf packs, conflict is resolved constantly, but overt aggression toward pups is rare, with most communication relying on posture, eye contact, and subtle signals rather than escalating confrontation. Domestic dogs inherited that same sensitivity to subtle cues, which is part of why a shift in your tone or stance often carries more weight than the volume of your voice. One especially telling pattern shows up across multiple training studies. Dogs trained primarily with reward-based methods tend to look toward their owners more often during problem-solving and show fewer stress signals like lip-licking, yawning, or lowered body posture during training sessions, compared to dogs trained with more aversive methods. Researchers interpret that increased eye contact as a sign the dog sees the owner as a source of useful information rather than a source of unpredictable pressure, which is, in the end, exactly what most owners actually want their dog to feel about them. And here's a detail that surprises almost everyone. Puppies raised in households with frequent loud scolding often show slower acquisition of new commands later in life. not faster, likely because early stress exposure shapes how readily the developing brain forms new associations going forward. The short-term compliance can come at a long-term cost to trainability itself. Final takeaway. Yelling feels like discipline, but to a dog's brain, it functions almost entirely as an alarm, and alarms don't teach lessons, they trigger survival responses. The pause you see after a shout isn't understanding. It's a nervous system doing what nervous systems do when they sense danger: shut down and wait for it to pass. The dogs who learn fastest, trust deepest, and make the fewest mistakes over time aren't the ones who've been corrected the loudest. They're the ones whose owners figured out how to be clear instead of intense, calm enough that the dog's brain stays open to actually learning something rather than closing down to survive the moment. The less mysterious a dog's behavior becomes to us, the less often we reach for volume in the first place, and that shift alone tends to change everything else that follows.